covering the third and fourth foundations of mindfulness. And just to recap, I want to start from the beginning so that we have in mind the context of all four. So even backing up from all four foundations, what's mindfulness, right? So mindfulness is awareness of the present moment with knowing, without judgment, and with care. So it's not just present moment awareness, it's present moment awareness with this like extra bit of cognition, with knowing, but without the judgment. And so the four foundations of mindfulness are, basically mindfulness 101. What are we actually paying attention to? What are we knowing? They are also super advanced because they are known as the direct path to realization. If you really practice these and really understand these, the core of your heart mind. And in Sanskrit and Pali, the word for heart mind is actually chitta, C-I-T-T-A, which actually doesn't just mean mind, it means heart mind. Or you can think of it as the mind is located here. So the four foundations, the first one that we went over in our second class was mindfulness of body. So this is what you would normally think of as understanding what's in the body. That includes the breath. That's internal, also external, right? Like, well, how does my body affect my environment? And how do other people's bodies affect the environment and me? And through mindfulness of body, it can be a very powerful practice to understand the truth of impermanence, of non-self. Remember, we did the four elements practice, and of suffering, that when we cling on to our body and things in general as permanent or having an identified self, creates suffering. So mindfulness of body. The second foundation is mindfulness of feeling tone. So this was the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, these initial responses or reactions that arise from all phenomena that come through our sense doors, our six senses. And the third foundation of mindfulness, which we'll talk about today, is mindfulness of mind. And that includes thought and emotion. So it's mindfulness of, yes, the actual content of the thought and emotion, but more importantly, what does that thought or emotion create in my mind? What type of mind? What quality of mind? And then the fourth foundation is mindfulness of mental objects, also known as mental formations, also known as dhammas in Pali, which, let's just get this confusion out of the way right now. Dhammas with a big D can mean like dharma, the teachings. Dharma or dhamma in Pali with a little d just means things. So when you think about it, mindfulness of objects, formations of dhammas, what that's supposed to be is that's mindfulness of the patterns and the processes that we create with our body, with our feeling tones, with our mind, how we weave those all together using processes and patterns and habits to create our reality. So the fourth foundation of mindfulness is, what are these processes and patterns that I've got going on? So dhammas being translated as things kind of makes sense. It's like the most basic level of all the processes that I have that string everything together. Okay, so those are the four. Let's backtrack to the third foundation a little bit and double click on that. So with the third foundation of mindfulness, we go from the first and second, which is body and feeling tone, which is kind of like present moment, what's going on right now, kind of body oriented, right? So even feeling tone, which is the tone of the feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, is coming in from a sense, the sense being located in the body. The third foundation switches that focus from body to mind. And what's interesting here is we're not pushing away thought. A lot of people think meditation is about getting rid of thought or pausing it, or, I've heard so many people say, I can't meditate, I have too many thoughts. In this third foundation of mindfulness, we're actually using our thoughts here, using our thinking process to understand our mind. And in doing so, then it gives us the possibility to liberate ourselves from our habits of mind. We're being tricky with our minds. We're actually using the mind, using the thoughts. And so, as I was saying earlier, it's not just developing a mindfulness of the thought, the content of where is my mind right now. It's also the quality of mind, which of course can come from noticing the content. So for example, if I'm thinking about lunch, is that starting to create kind of a craving quality in my mind? Or if a thought arises about a certain person that maybe I'm having some tension with right now, does that create an angry quality of mind? And that can be, substitute that adjective for anything, joyful, easeful. You can even substitute it with not emotions, but maybe it's a color or maybe it's a texture. So we're kind of, it's like the thoughts are the trees and the quality of mind is the forest. So we're zooming out a little bit. And this third foundation is both, right? It's the content as well as the zoomed out quality or mood of mind. And so often what happens is we take a feeling tone, as we talked about last week, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and we then advance it to the next stage of, well, pleasant actually is going to turn into clinging. Unpleasant is going to turn into get that away from me, aversion. And neither pleasant nor unpleasant can turn into delusion or ignorance or confusion. And so part of the third foundation is noticing that pathway from bare experience of the feeling tone to one of these three poisons of clinging, aversion, and delusion. So when we're doing this practice, it doesn't mean that these emotions are going to disappear or that we're trying to make them disappear. But by bringing attention to them through this third foundation of mindfulness, what we're doing is we're taking away their fuel. These emotions can exist, but hopefully what we're doing is we're creating a little space around them so that any hooks that they had in us can start to relax. It's like if you think of something that gets stuck on a hook, if you loosen the thing that it's hooked in, then there's more possibility for the hook to just naturally come out. So if we think about thoughts, right, we have a lot of thoughts. I read some stat that said we have 70,000 thoughts per day, which translates into 12 thoughts per second. That's a lot, right? They're super fast. They come and they go. Some of them are so subtle, we don't even recognize them as thoughts, right? Like, I know it often feels like I'm thinking multiple thoughts at one time. Okay, I want lunch, but in the background, God, I hope they don't have this, I don't have that, they don't have that, whatever it might be. Sometimes I don't even notice these thoughts. But sometimes I also notice that the ones that are big thoughts that stand out, I start to define myself by those thoughts. I am the one who is thinking this thought, right? I think, therefore I am. That's what we've been trained to think. And it's really easy to get lost in the thought, to dive into the trees, to bury ourselves in the trunk and think that that is all there is. And so when we notice that, even if we just are paying attention to that content of the thought, we're noticing it from the perspective of a noticer, right? Who is not caught in the thought. They say, oh, look at me, I am thinking about lunch. So this is what the third foundation allows us to do. And for a lot of people, this is like the most important foundation of mindfulness, because it's what a lot of people associate with meditation, mindfulness. What do I do with these thoughts? I have monkey mind, it's going all over the place. The problem is not the thoughts. The opportunity is to notice the relationship to the thoughts. And then what those thoughts do in our mind and body, that quality, that mood. Once we create a little bit of space around that, then maybe it gives us the opportunity to pause before an automatic reaction arises. So we can then choose, how do I actually want to respond to this? And don't get me wrong, this takes practice. This is why we practice. It's not just all fairies and butterflies, right? Like we got to sit our butts down on the cushion. We got to formally practice this and notice with kindness, with kindness. Just because it's not fairies and butterflies doesn't mean it's not kind. And so as we continue to practice this, noticing the thought, approaching it with compassion, giving it some space, then we can give ourselves the opportunity to take the wise next step, to have some agency over that. So that's mindfulness of mind, the third foundation of mindfulness. And as I was mentioning earlier, the fourth foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of mental objects. And you can think of it as objects, for example, objects of meditation, what we place our mind on. And the fourth foundation actually encompasses 108 objects. I'm not going to read through all of them, but they are essentially, if I could summarize, they are essentially filters, right? So I talked about processes, patterns. You can also think of them as filters, these 108 objects. They're filters through which we often see the world, interpret the world as our reality, and therefore either create or relieve suffering. So another name for this mental objects is also mental formations. This is another way to think of it. So you can think of them as formations because all events that pass through our six senses are filtered by our mind to become a solid event, right? Like everything that we hear somehow comes through this brain, this labeling system, this cognition to turn into, oh, that's the sound of a car. And so that's a process of formation. And so while we're doing that path in between, there is the labeling, but sometimes there are other things, patterns as well, that maybe associate, like we were talking about earlier, desire with it or aversion with it. Or maybe something incites me or reminds me or brings me into a state of sloth and torpor. Like sloth and torpor, these are like words that are translations from what the Buddha said is basically laziness. Like I just don't really feel like doing this. This object of what I'm placing my mind on is incurring this like, ugh, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do anything type of mentality. So that's, I'm using examples of one of the 108 here. I'm not going to try to use all 108, but those are 3 examples of the 108 objects. So, I was mentioning trees, forest, the thought, the content itself, you can think of as the tree. The third foundation, the quality of mind, you can think of as the forest. The fourth foundation, you can zoom out here and think of it as the whole ecological system, right? The system that all of it works together in. And so the fourth foundation allows us to see more clearly how it is that we get identified with our experiences, how it is that we get hooked. It's not just, oh, I have this thought and this quality of mind right now. Oh, it's because I'm engaging in this process that makes that a hook for me, that gets me caught up in it, and that sticks with me long after the actual experience has ended. And so when these mind states come up, these moods of mind, these quality of mind, the fourth foundation is what makes them stick around. Also is what helps them go away, because there are some skillful objects of meditation, skillful aspects of the fourth foundation. The fourth foundation also talks about how to keep unskillful objects from coming up again. And so it's really this noticing of what's skillful and what's not. And in doing so, then we can start to understand what creates suffering, how we suffer, where that suffering is rooted, and of course, how to liberate ourselves from it. So these 108 mental objects are actually organized into 5 different lists. I'm not going to go into all of the lists. Google is super helpful for this. Tricycle magazine is also super helpful for this. I'm going to read the names of the lists, and you can start to get a sense maybe for some of these patterns that the Buddha taught are common to how we make solid things that we see around us, how we process the world. Okay, so the first list is the 5 hindrances. So it's like a list of lists. It's a list of 5 lists, and each of the lists itself has like more numbers in it. 5 hindrances, and you can think of them as hindrances to concentration, or hindrances to realization or liberation, like what we've been talking about. So 5 hindrances. And what I was mentioning earlier of like the desire, the aversion, the sloth and torpor, those are 3 of the 5. So that's list number 1. List number 2 is the 5 aggregates. These are like piles of physical things essentially that we interpret as being me, even though the real me is much more broad and expansive than these 5 aggregates. Third list is the 6 sense spaces. So these are the senses, right? Eye, nose, mouth, etc. Fourth list, the 7 factors of enlightenment. So these are what I was talking about. Oh, the Buddha also taught some skillful objects of meditation, some skillful processes. So the 7 factors of enlightenment include things like, I'll just start, investigation, energy, joy, mindfulness. I'm not going to go through the whole list. And then the 5th list is the 4 noble truths. 4 noble truths. And I will talk about those briefly. So the 4 are: there is suffering, dissatisfaction, unease in the world. That just exists. So if you think that you're special or not doing life right because you have suffering in your life, no, everyone has it. The cause of suffering, which is wanting things to be other than how they actually are. That's just like a really brief summary of it. Yes, there is a possible way to cease suffering. That's the 3rd foundation of mindfulness. And the 4th foundation of mindfulness is there's actually a path that the Buddha laid out called the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so don't worry too much about these lists. As I said, Google, Tricycle, all over the internet. But just think of these as examples of processes, patterns, habits that we use to understand the world. These are filters that we use to understand the world that can either increase or decrease suffering. And these are like a lifetime practice, right? These 4 foundations of mindfulness, as I said, mindfulness 101, as well as super advanced. So definitely for me, I haven't mastered all these lists yet. Like I'm still learning, I'm still studying. And studying is not just reading and intellectualizing, but also practicing with them. Right? Like incorporating them into my heart, in my life. Okay, so let's talk about the planet and the earth and how these things relate with the world. So, of course, we're talking about patterns and habits. First thing off the bat, right? We can get to know our own patterns and maybe even the patterns of others. And once we can have a greater understanding of ourselves and of others, and knowing that these lists are not customized to me, that they're common to all beings, maybe that helps me to have some compassion for people when they do act lazy or aggressive or whatever it might be. Just knowing that these are just human processes. And so if we can act from a point of view of compassion and understanding when we're interacting with people, just that, think of how much power that could have in all the interactions that we're seeing happening in the world today, in your own interactions, in your own life. It helps us notice our own biases, right? So last week we talked about our feeling tones, and I talked about how, some things give me an unpleasant feeling tone that I'm like, wait, that's not real. So we can start to understand our own biases with all 4 foundations. And of course, that has huge implications for how we interact in the world. Another way that these 4 foundations can help open up our world, relieve suffering, is there is this awareness, right? This awareness that is doing the knowing. This awareness that is noticing the patterns, this awareness that is noticing the anger or the quality of mind. That awareness is not angry. The awareness that is noticing the anger is not angry. So this awareness is this broader sense that is expansive, that has no boundaries, no age, no gender, no time, no race, and is common to all of us. It's this larger identity that has no real identity. And for me, the feeling that comes from being in touch with that, when I'm able to touch into that, maybe after a long period of practice, what I really feel from that is just love. It sounds so cheesy, I know, but it's this heart feeling of love that comes from it. That might not be what your experience is or other people's experience, but I just want to share that that's what comes up for me when I am able to touch into that sense. And so with these 4 foundations, I would offer an invitation to notice, and maybe that's not right now, it's not today, maybe it's later on as you digest, as you chew on this, but from this larger awareness, can we apply this kind of broader lens to how we think about the planet? Right? Can we actually have a felt sense of interconnectedness with all things? Because maybe everything is just a process. Everything except this broad, expansive awareness. And maybe this is the same thing that happens to other people and other beings. So in Buddhism, there are actually what's known as precepts for helpful living. The most basic form, or the most basic, it's another list, is a list of 5. There are also lists of 8 and 14 and other ones, but let's just talk about the most basic one of 5. And so these 5 precepts are kind of like guidelines, but they're not like strict rules. You must do this, otherwise you will go to hell. What they do is they create a ground for practice. That's like the most basic way to understand these 5 precepts. They create a ground for practice so that you can practice in a way that's safe and conducive to waking up. So they help remove obstacles to practice. So I'm going to share these 5. Number 1 is to abstain from taking life. Number 2 is to abstain from taking what is not given. Number 3 is to abstain from sensuous misconduct. Number 4, to abstain from false speech. 5, to abstain from intoxicants that tend to cloud the mind. So these 5 precepts are often recited and I guess committed to at the beginning of retreat periods, practice periods. But as I was thinking about how these 4 foundations and practice, Buddhist practice in general, applies to life and the planet, these precepts really came to mind because all of them actually have to do with the planet. They all have the possibility, if we don't abide by them, to harm the earth. And so when we violate these precepts, the 4 foundations can help us to notice what that does to our quality of mind, right? This is not necessarily just about the object of who I'm harming with the precepts, but it's what it does to my quality of mind. And so that can be another practice, right? Everything here is a practice. Even these precepts, which sound like rules, are a practice. When I intentionally, and I did this yesterday, when I intentionally wash a bug down the sink, how does that make me feel? What does that do to my quality of mind? Right? You can notice that. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there with the 3rd and 4th foundations of mindfulness. And folks, there's a lot more to that. So feel free to like take other classes, do your own research, breathe. There's a lot more, but this hopefully is just a dip in the water and a little bit of relating it to thinking about how we care for ourselves and the earth. So let's talk about walking meditation. So walking meditation is sometimes known, if you practice a lot and go to groups, as the time to go to the bathroom. I actually think, yes, you can use the time to go to the bathroom, but it is a super powerful practice. It's really often underestimated. It's also a fantastic alternative if you are feeling like you cannot sit still in meditation, and that's what everyone else is doing, right? Maybe you have trauma in the body and you can't sit still. Maybe you've had something happen this morning and there's too much kind of anxious energy in your body and you still want to practice. You can do walking meditation. For me, it's also a really beautiful way to connect with the earth. So Thich Nhat Hanh talked about walking meditation as with each step, you can feel like you're kissing the earth. I really love that. Right? There's this kindness to it, this love to it. The other thing that I love about walking meditation is that it's kind of a bridge between like on the butt, your butt on the cushion, sitting meditation, super still, to everyday life. Because the whole point is to bring this practice into our everyday life, not to just sit on the cushion all day long, to bring it into everyday life. And so this walking meditation is like, oh, okay, my body is moving. What does that feel like? And what thoughts come up because my body is moving? Okay, well, I can bring attention to this. And so often what we do is you pick an object of meditation. This is just in general, right? In walking meditation, the object of meditation that we're choosing to place our minds on is the feeling of the feet touching the ground. All right, so it's feeling the contact with the earth. And then if you want, you can add in the feeling of the body moving through space. It's very simple. You're not doing much else besides that. So it's just feeling the body in contact with the earth. When you take a step forward, you know that's your right foot, right? This is that knowing part of mindfulness. When you're lifting your right foot, you know you're lifting. When you're placing it, you know you're placing it. When you're shifting, you know you're shifting. Same thing with the left foot. So we are going to practice this for about 10 minutes. And what we'll do is just find a space where you can go back and forth. And the reason why we go back and forth and not just keep going in this practice, there are other practices where people do just keep going. But today we're just going to go back and forth. Is so that we don't have to think about where we're going, right? It like makes that part super boring. So your mind doesn't get attached to that and can really just be in the meditation. So whatever space that you have around you, you can just do the walking, and it doesn't have to be super, super, super slow, but not fast. You should think of it as like just like medium slow, like slower than your regular walking pace. And of course, as you're practicing in, you're outside of today, you can switch it up as you feel like you need. You can also just stop sometimes and just stand there and just notice, am I really present right now? Am I really present on this earth right now? So for me, walking meditation includes standing meditation. Okay, any questions on walking meditation before we get up? Okay, so let's do it.